Right, hi everyone. I always, Amy, I don't know about you now, but the music of the countdown timer always makes me almost quite relaxed by the time I come out of the timer.
Very chilled.
I feel like I'm on a game show.
We're about to quiz you, Sally.
Yeah, exactly.
You never know. We could do some awards for prizes for sort of the best answer. That could be quite fun. That could be quite interesting. Anyway, right. So just my general introduction for everybody is Amy and I obviously are writing a book. We're doing a lot of interviews, and in the interests and I suppose my beliefs of what the industry should be doing, which is far more transparent in the way that that we share everything that we have in terms of insights and experiences. That's what we're doing as part of our interview series, because we can't ever hope to get all of the insights that we get from all of our sort of wonderful interviewees into the book. So this is to create a bank of content, which we're just doing live because I always just like the format. I think it's a nice way of doing it. And obviously then creates a bank of content for forever. So today joined by Sally Jones. Sally, do you just want to sort of give a bit of an overview in terms of your background and perhaps why you think I might have asked you to come into this when we're looking at a digital transformation, leadership, innovation sort of book? It'd be great to get your overview.
Right, yeah, so I spent 13 years at British Land, where my last role was head of strategy, digital and technology, and hopefully that kind of is what it says on the tin. And I did that role, I did strategy from 2015 and then gradually took on the more tech parts of the role. And I know we're going to talk about investment, which is something else I did while I was there. And I left about a year ago, so time moves fast. And I'm now doing, I think it's called portfolio. So I'm doing various things for in the prop tech industry. And I hope very shortly to be taking on another role in the property industry, which will become evident in a short while. So very much moved into the prop tech industry, where I was on the board of Equiem. I'm no longer on the board of Equiem. I stepped down. I'm an advisor to Swift Connect, which is an access control business. And I'm also a venture partner at PropTech One, which is an early stage VC business.
Wow. Okay. So that's quite a journey you've gone. Were you doing that when you were at British Land, or is that all new as a result of it?
I was on the board of Equiem at British Land because British Land's got a share in Equiem. But no, I wasn't doing those other things when I was at British Land.
That's quite varied, isn't it? How have you found, I mean, obviously given your background in the traditional sort of incumbent sector, going into sort of the Equiem stuff with obviously Gab, I'm sure you've worked sort of closely with and others. And then the venture side of things. How have you found that in terms of, because they're very, very different roles and sort of work. How's that been?
Well, I've had a really varied career, actually. So I started off in the city, where I was an investment analyst. And just to shout out, if anybody of you know Mike Prue, I used to sit in the next bank of desk to Mike Prue, who's a well-known property analyst. So I did that for 10 years. And that's quite a small mindset in terms of you sort of working on your own. They're small businesses. I worked in a fairly small business, so very entrepreneurial, not a lot of processes. It was, very, very long time ago. So businesses are quite different. And then I went into Cadbury Schweppes, which was 55,000 people. And from that, I went into British Land, which at the time was about 150 people. So it felt really small by comparison to Cadbury Schweppes. And it had less process, less people, all these things. So I think the reason probably why I find it easy skipping from one thing to another is because my career's been quite varied in terms of the types of businesses that I've worked for.
And what was your role at Cadbury, and then did you go straight into strategy?
No. So I was an analyst, investment analyst, and I went into Cadbury Schweppes to do investor relations. And then and I did a bit of strategy there as well. And then I did a couple other things. And then I hopped into British Land, where I was head of investor relations. Right. And then when Simon Carter actually left, he was head of strategy. That's when I got that role. And I did the roles together for a little while. I did investor relations and strategy together, which you often see actually in businesses. They aren't enormous. So, but I think it was all I learned in my role as an analyst, and also at Cadbury, where I did a lot of strategy for Cadbury as well, working with the strategy team.
Can I ask a question? I love this kind of breadth of experience that you have, and you obviously have over the years got a very entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the kind of formative experiences that have led you to be able to think in an entrepreneurial way and act in an entrepreneurial way? Sorry, that's a difficult question. I know.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is formative, and part of it is your own, what you're good at. So when you start in being an investment analyst, you really have to. You're given a pen and paper, and you have to go out and do your own thing. So you have to go and meet companies, and in my case, it was food producers, so Cadbury, Schweppes, Unilever, Tate and Lyle, and you have to go and make an investment case, which you then have to sell to fund managers. So you have to be a self-starter, because no one's going to say what you should do every morning. And it's very much a self-starter industry. If you think about it, sort of people that you'll meet in the city. So I think it's a combination of where you work, and then if you're any good at it, if you've got any of those skills. So I think that inherently the way I think is quite it's analytically, but it's also quite lateral. I'm quite a lateral thinker, which some people tell me, they go like, where's her mind going to now? So it can be a strength and a weakness.
So this ability then to make sense of information and data, would you say that's a really cool strength? That's
a cool strength. But also I think laterally, it's thinking about things, which is just the way my brain works. I've come to the conclusion it's the way my brain works.
So I often hear that when we think about entrepreneurs, is this ability to see around the corner.
Yeah.
How do you do that? And again, I know that's a really difficult question, but we hear it all the time that to be entrepreneurial, to be innovative, you have to be able to see around the corner. That's actually a really difficult thing to do, but some people seem to be able to do it really well. I've
had at times benefited from a bit of analysis on my style and my strengths, my development needs. And I think that strategy has always been the thing I've been really interested in, because I've always been interested in thinking about what's going to happen. I've heard an interview by Bill Gates. Look, I'm not comparing myself to Bill Gates, but I think it's something about having a really curious mind. And I think if you have a really curious mind, again, it can both be something that's good and bad, because you tend to read everything. And so sometimes you feel your brain's going to explode with all the information you've got inside it. And at some point you have to stop doing that. You have to say, okay, I've now looked at all this stuff, kind of, but I'm always reading, looking, wanting to understand things quite broadly. So it's probably a curious mind, I would think.
Do you know what? Sorry, Amy, I've got to come in on that, because that word curious comes up time and time and time again with the people that we're interviewing.
Yeah.
So my question on this, and it's only just occurred to me now, do you think you can create a curious mindset, or do you think you just have it inherently?
Well, it's like many things, isn't it? If you ask me to read a 1,000-page legal document, I mean, good luck. Because I'll be terrible at it, because it's not, I will get bored long before I've got past the first page. I'm kind of joking, but not. So I think there's something that your mind is better at. But I think it's easier to be curious than to be able to read a 1,000-page legal document, because you just learn to read, don't you? Just learn to absorb things. And these days, there's so much fantastic information around there in so many different formats. There's podcasts, there's people give you bite-sized information, there's long books. So I would say it's easier to kind of attempt to be more curious.
There's quite a lot of
Sorry.
There's quite a lot of work that's been done on this by psychologist Carol Dweck and then others after her into how to create a growth mindset. So I think the thinking now is that it can be built, but it takes quite a lot of time and experience and just picking up on all this stuff, because I find it really interesting. Knowing what if you were building a team around you that you knew needed to be prepared to innovate and, perhaps traverse in quite uncertain times, what kinds of skills would you be looking for in that team?
I think it's a bit, you want a bit varied. So when we took people into the strategy team at British Land, we were very fortunate. We had about 7 people, or 8 people, and we took a lot of young people. We took them straight out of university. And there we were the type of person. And they were all a little bit cookie cutter in that sense, because we found that you wanted people who were had very good analytic brains, very good mathematical brains, but also they were able to, they were very good influencers. You know, they were good with people, they were able to collaborate. So we found there was a type of person that was very good in that team. And if you had someone who's purely analytical, they were terrible, because they just couldn't work. You know, the amount of working with people around the business you had to do. And you had to be quite humble too. You had to be very clever, but not a know-it. You know, because you had to realise that people across the business knew an awful lot, and often the time it was how you got them to put all that knowledge. But then I think, so that's someone who's providing some background analytics. But on the other hand, I think if you've got someone who's going to be implementing technology, you probably need someone who's a bit bold as well. So a bit of a risk taker. Someone who's happy to jump over the cliff every now and then. So in the answer to the question, I think you need varied people. And then you need someone sitting behind that person who's probably really process orientated, who can say, great idea, but, you know, do you understand all you need to do? And then also know when to pull the plug when it's going wrong. So I think lots of different people.
I think you've picked up on some amazing points there. Actually, influence isn't something that gets talked about that much in terms of innovation. I think it's really important. I don't think we're talking about influence in the sense of having loads and loads of connections and things like that.
No,
it's the ability to get people to take notice of you, and the bravery to ask people for help and feedback and things like that. Those are the kinds of things that create really helpful influence. Really helpful. Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, but I think just on the influence, what it is that in real estate, it's probably the same in other industries. It's quite a complicated ecosystem. You know, from fragmented, you have multiple ownerships. The people who owns it often doesn't manage it, you know, and so on and so forth. So you've got a hugely complicated ecosystem, and you need to get quite a lot of those people on board. So not only the people in your own business, but often the people that you work with, because, for example, at Broadgate, GIC is a partner. So if British Land wants to put some tech in, it's got to get GIC on board. And I think that the lesson that we learned as we went through this the process of, you know, of delivering tech and British Land was you really can't do enough influencing and engagement, because you can't do it in a vacuum. And it won't work if you don't take people with you. You need their buy-in, you need their experience, all these things. And I would still say I'm still finding that out. Even now I'm doing some work for Swift Connect. The big thing is managing that whole ecosystem and spending time with all the key people that you need to spend time with.
There's so much to unpick in all of this.
Sorry.
No, because it's really quite pressing in terms of the things that you're talking about. I'm going to do that. Amy and I had a laugh on the last one, because we always say I need to go back to this bit, and this time it's me, Amy. I'm the one who's going to take this back. Yeah. I'm quite interested by that journey within British Land in particular. Actually, no. Before that, I'm going to go back even further. You said you're moving back into a role into the new year. Is that back into the property bit or into the tech bit?
It will be a role in more established property, but it's not a full-time role. It's just a board role. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I'd love to hear more in due course on all of that. Just because obviously a year out of British Land, then going back in with all of the learnings you've had in that year, I suspect you're now going to bring even more new things into it all. So that's quite interesting to me. But just talking about that role that you have with British Land,
yeah.
You talked about you took on the strategy role back in 2015.
Yeah.
So 2 questions in one here. Back in 2015, it was Chris Grigg?
Grigg.
And he was running it back then, right?
He was CEO, yeah. He left in 2020, I think, or 19. Yeah.
So what was the direction that you received back then in terms of, you're going to head up the strategy side of British Land? What was the direction you had in terms of the, what did they want to do? How far in the future were they looking, or was it just day-to-day strategy decisions? And then at what point did tech come into it, and why?
Okay.
So two questions.
In strategy, I mean, essentially the strategy team, the thing that we did every year was this annual strategy cycle, annual strategy for the board. There was a 2-day offsite and you'd produce papers for it. And there was a lot of stuff that was classic real estate. It was looking at macroeconomic, sectoral trends and thinking about capital allocation, all that kind of stuff. And so when I started, Brexit was a big thing we were thinking about, the risks of Brexit. So you would have a discussion about, to I guess either validate the strategy or alter course a bit. So that would have been just classic real estate strategy. But Chris brought a lot of consumer-facing perspective into the business, and that's one of the big things he did was make British Land much more customer-facing. So alongside that, we did a lot of customer-facing work about what the campuses meant. But and also we looked at big trends, big macro trends, and one of the big macro trends was obviously technology. So it was one of the things I was very interested in. So there was a lot of leeway for me to do things I was interested in, so long as, when I went to him, he said, I think that's relevant. So we started.
He was quite early on into the sector. I mean, I remember Chris being probably one of the first very, very senior leaders to be on panel discussions, and was quite happy being forward facing in terms of not saying I know enough about it, but being quite open to the ideas. I was quite impressed by that.
Well, he has a very curious mind, so one of the things he did is to bring a lot of that kind of different thinking into the business. So British Land has benefited from his drive to bring new things in. But just getting back to the tech, so as a big trend, it was something that we clearly need to look at, and something I thought was really interesting, particularly given the amount of disruption that was evident in the sector and outside the sector. So if you remember, WeWork was just beginning to explode. And looking at the whole thing about Netflix and Blockbuster, all these things which have been disrupted. So it was right to think about how real estate might be changed by it. So we thought about it in 3 ways. Well, how are our customers being impacted? Let's say retail, more recently offices. Secondly is all the processes that run through the middle. And last is your business model, which is the most dangerous, of course. So WeWork would have been one of the things where you just had to check that WeWork wasn't going to disrupt the business model in the way that companies had disrupted the hotel model.
Yeah.
So that's how we started to think about it. So that's really how we got into tech in a big way. And it's largely because I was the only person who was, I was the person who was most interested in it. So
hang on. So let me just press you on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So in analysing WeWork as a business, it made you consider the business model. And I remember so clearly arguing at the time that WeWork is definitely not a technology company. It's a technology enabled business, and it's just revolutionizing the business model of how we utilize space. It wasn't a tech company.
Sorry, carry on.
So it's sort of taking that to the next level, which is what aspect of the WeWork analysis that you did then made you think technology was an answer, or was something to be explored deeper?
No, it's not that. It's just that if you look at other industries being disrupted, you say, can real estate be disrupted in a similar way? It wasn't that we came to the conclusion it was. It was saying, there are industries that are being majorly disrupted by technology. What is the risk in real estate? And WeWork was the company that was out there, and everybody was saying it would disrupt real estate. I mean, I agree with you. I think that it people often said, well, Flex has been around forever. It's just a serviced office business. Which
it is. They just put a brand over the top of it, which was cool.
They put a brand, and they were creating a lot of noise, and they were creating a lot of potential issues. For example, is the big debate in British Land: should we lease a building to WeWork? And the conclusion we came to was we should create our own flexible brand if that's what we wanted. But then we did it in a very different way. We didn't do co-working. We created Story. So I think it makes you think about your offer. And so British Land very early started to think about an offer for the customer, which went all the way from traditional, 15 years, all the way down to a very flexible 1-year model, but not co-working.
Interesting. So from a strategic perspective, what I'd like to again go into a little bit there is I'm often quite critical of the leaders in the industry for being too short-sighted. They're not looking long enough in advance. But maybe I'm being too flippant here, but it sounds as if you weren't looking very short-term, because actually that is if you're questioning the very traditional 15-year lease and going much more to the flexibility angle, you are taking a very long-term play there.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
It's part of the model. I mean, it's not, given where British Land has its, and remember, I don't work there anymore, so I hope they're not sort of completely changed the strategy. But I mean, long leases will always be a bedrock. Well, will be a bedrock of their business for a while because of the type of real estate they produce. Think about Broadgate. Think about 2 Broadgate, where A&O and JLL have taken the whole building between them. But it's part of a total offer. It's part of a total offer, recognizing that the market has changed, and there's some people, and it's a growing amount of people, who want a more flexible offer with more services attached to it. So I think it's long term because British Land had to wear losses in Story for a while. They had to, so that was a decision which did meant losses and lower income for a period of time.
How did you manage that? Because that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges of change within our industry, which is, creating slightly, and I hesitate to use the term disruptive strategies, but I'll use it in this instance.
Yeah.
When you're using those, you are at odds with what the shareholders, other stakeholders, and actually people who are incentivized on bonus schemes and everything.
Yeah.
It goes against all of that. So how did you, as in charge of that element, Chris, and all of the board, how did everyone become happy with that as a concept?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, in incentive terms, a board can easily carve out things.
What do you mean by that? Sorry?
So if you're in the offices business, they can say, well, the bonus is going to be based on performance excluding Story, for example, because we've taken a strategic decision to invest in it. Okay, so that's perfectly within the gift of the company to do that. And then the board, obviously has to, it has to do this with shareholder consent, can always say this is a long-term strategic decision which we all believe in, and therefore we will carve it out of the bonus. It'll be set aside. We'll consider the performance excluding the losses that you make from this business. You can always do things like that, but it has to require that the shareholders and everybody would believe that what you're doing is of value to the business within a time horizon that is sensible. You can't say, in 10 years' time for a property company, this little thing which is losing lots of money. It didn't lose lots of money, by the way, but it's got to have a time horizon that people are happy to live with. So I just think it's about communication, about taking people with you, so that they understand what you're doing. And to be honest with you, Story was never big enough in the first instance for it to be really meaningful.
Yeah. And just for clarification, Story was the offering that you put, which was the much more flexible lease arrangements rather than the 15-year standard.
Basically it's 1 year plus. It's for businesses with 30 or more, and you get your own office plus access to shared amenities. Yeah, that's what Story does. It's a high quality offer.
And so, and going back to sorry, Amy, I know I'm hogging this sort of line of questioning, but I just think it's quite interesting to see how the thought process and the structure was worked over time.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about strategy came first, technology came later. You'd obviously looked at WeWork as a sort of an example of the sorts of things that the industry could face in time, disruptive forces coming in. So how did technology come into it? Chris was obviously interested, curious about it. You were obviously interested and curious about it. So how did you start that journey of bringing more of a technology mindset into British Land? Just sort of explore that for me.
Technology mindset. Well, I think.
Sorry, I'm making assumptions that it needed a technology mindset for people to take it on board. But so just talk to me about that journey of technology then, rather than the mindset bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing that was important was that it had sponsorship at the highest level. And I think you can't do things like that without sponsorship at the highest level. And Chris was absolutely excellent at sort of sponsoring and protecting. He also did that with Story, to be honest with you. You know, he didn't let the budgets get cut. You know, he would stand up and say, you know, no, we're gonna continue to invest behind that. And he publicly kind of within the business stood up behind things. So, for example, on technology, we formulated a sort of a technology steering group. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But he would chair it from time to time. He would poll up at the meetings. So it had his very direct sponsorship. And then when we created the smart buildings team, you know, he was happy to carve money out to create that team. So all those things, if they don't come from the top, I think they're almost impossible to drive through a business where it's not the lifeblood of a business, because tech is becoming more important, particularly when you think about sustainability and finance and property systems, how they get modernized. But in 2015, you know, it was no way meaningful to how returns or bonuses were generated.
Yeah.
So most people in the business, they go, like, it's all very interesting, but you know, I'm not gonna spend my time on it. And I'm not going to give you the budget either.
That high level sponsorship is so important, isn't it? For so many reasons. It really sets the tone, and it creates a sense, if it's done well, it creates a sense of psychological safety. And I just want to pick up on that, but also I think the question of risk has come up quite a lot, and I just really love to ask you, you know, how you and your leadership teams that you've worked with have approached this question of risk. How do you get that balance right between, you know, in innovation, we know you have to take some risks, you have to, you know, you have to jump into this, you know, sense of uncertainty, you have to help your teams to do the same. Are there processes or principles that you followed that have helped you and your teams to accept an acceptable level of risk? What's your approach to that?
I tell you what's the most bizarre thing is that property is a really risky business. You know, so the teams in property are absolutely up for spending a huge amount of money with a long-term horizon on developing regeneration. You know, they'll spend billions of pounds regenerating something. Think about King's Cross, you know, British Land's in with Aussie Super at Canada Water. If you go around Broadgate, where about in 2015-16, we did a vision, and that's all coming right now, the billions of pounds have been spent around Broadgate Circle. I mean, in the 3 buildings that are going to be going up, 100 Liverpool Street, and then the ones to follow, there's well over 2 billion of value in those buildings. Maybe, yeah. And yet the real estate companies are really comfortable with that. And they'll do it through economic cycles, you know, and they'll spend billions of pounds on great big holes in the ground. So that for me is a really, really weird thing. But tech is something that they just, you know, it's not in their lifeblood. So it's something that they're much more cautious about. And I think people often say, oh, you need to fail fast. I mean, I just think that's a catastrophically poor idea in real estate when you're put tech in. Because if you keep failing, the customer's really hacked off, and plus no one's going to go with you. So I'm sorry, I just think you need to do it very carefully in real estate. You need to do it iteratively, bit by bit. So
can I just challenge that, looking at the industry more broadly, and then I'm going to bring it to British Land.
Yeah.
Is the one of our guests previously, Amy, has said that the real estate industry is immune to change. It can't. doesn't like change management at all. Is that a fair thing because of what you've just said, Sally?
In some ways, you go where the money is, don't you? So I think the real estate industry can be really innovative in certain things, like, let's say, design, building materials, all sorts of things. You know, there's some really innovative ideas that have gone on. Think about King's Cross again. You know, Roger Madlin and who's the guy, his other co-partner, were very innovative with King's Cross, and it was their own vision, I think, which took people with them. So I don't think that it's right that they don't change, but they won't change where they don't see the need to, and where, you know, by doing things the way you've always done them, you make a lot of money. So I think those of us involved in tech shouldn't be dismissive of the industry sometimes in the way that we are. I think that we have to be better at taking them with us. And I know it's really hard. And you meet some people who are real blockers, and they're still around. But
they'll always be blockers. That's the problem. They're never going to change. It's, you know, that's the, Amy, you mentioned growth mindset earlier on. They've got a fixed mindset. They don't want to change. It's too,
because they don't need to. They don't need to. Because if you do the same thing, you'll still make a lot of money. So I guess it's, what's the incentive for people to change, you know, what they're doing.
I want to draw a line under the...
Sorry?
I want to ask, what is the incentive? What is the incentive for people to change from your point of view?
I think there are, I mean, you know, you guys you've been speaking to a lot of people, but if I think about what's happened in my journey through British Land, I would probably see, you know, there's been some great people I've worked with there who are very forward thinking, you know, but we've had to take the organization with us. But two things I would say is the customer's changing. So you've got all the innovation around Flex, you've got all the innovation around digital, you know, or what people want to offer their employees. And I think sustainability. I don't know if that's what you've been hearing, but for me, those are powerful forces of change within the industry, which certainly at the top end of the industry are changing what the offer is.
Yeah, I think it's the carrot and the stick approach, and I think for too long the promises of improved efficiency, productivity have been a lot of carrot, and the sustainability angle is going to be the stick, and it's starting to hit a lot harder. Some people haven't even woken up from being whacked over the head several times yet, and it will be slow to do it. Certain regions more than others is what I see.
But the customers, the people who what JLL and A&O do at 2 Broadgate, which is going up at the minute.
Right.
You know, global law firm, very forward-thinking agent business, who I know certainly JLL very interested in how they use tech in buildings. So, and that will be a very smart building as well. We'll be able to do all sorts of things.
Yeah, but what I find what's quite interesting at the moment, and somebody said it previously, and this is almost it's a comment to remind myself about it more than anything else than a question. But someone remarked earlier on about how people are so focused on sustainability issues, and they're moving into these wonderful sustainable buildings, which are the smartest buildings and the most carbon neutral buildings and efficient in their energy usage. But actually, the very virtue of them moving to an office is actually not sustainable in the first instance, because what we're doing is we're celebrating new, we're not improving old. And I thought that was quite an interesting insight, in the sense that they are ticking a box of becoming more sustainable, but actually at the same time they're not.
Yeah. Won't that change because retrofits will become a much more important part of the market, and therefore people will.
I hope so, Sally. I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so. Until the retrofit angle on the tech is better, because everything is wrong. a considerable amount of the technology and the innovation is still focused on the new, not on the retro, and I worry about the retrofitting side.
Yeah. But won't regulation take you
expense.
there? Won't regulation take you to retrofits?
Yeah, it will.
Pull a building down.
Yes, it will. It'll be more stick to whack people with and make them, but it still comes down to what you said at the start, which was it costs money. Yeah. And retrofitting costs money, obviously not as much as moving to a brand new building, but I think there's a long way to go until people realize it's a more attractive option.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a bit of talking out of both sides of the mouth on that one.
Yeah, it's really hard. So anyway, I'm conscious that we've spent a long time looking at the British Land aspect.
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, let me finish on one thing on that, just very quickly, and this is a very quick answer. Do you feel British Land were, on a sliding scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the most innovative company and 1 is not innovative at all, where do you think British Land were in genuinely in terms of their innovation against others?
Well, the only thing I can say is what people told us. So when we work with suppliers, they said they think British Land's a very forward-thinking business. And okay. I also think that if you're in a business, let's say you take, and I'm making this up, Aberdeen, which is lots of different funds and so on and so forth, and it's managing money in lots of different ways. It's just much more difficult for them to have a holistic, property strategy in the way that British Land has and can drive it through. So I think that there's something around the mindset, there's something around the structure of the business that means it's an easier place to do that kind of innovation. I can't tell you it's much better than anybody else, but that's what people told us. That actually it's very enabled in terms of how it does innovation.
All right, Amy, can I ask a question about venture, if that's okay? Just a quick strategy question. So obviously, British Land were investors in some funds. You're now obviously a venture partner at PropTech One, who obviously have been around for considerable time.
Yeah.
Do you feel? Yeah. So probably again 2 questions in one. Do you feel venture is a positive influence on innovation within the built environment? And sort of how have you found it sitting on the other side now with that investment thesis looking at tech? So is it positive, and how have you found the experience?
Well, I guess it has to be positive, doesn't it? It's because it's providing the money.
Yeah, it provides, but this is where I don't know the answer to this question, because I keep mulling it over in my head, because you're right. It provides money for innovation to happen.
Yeah.
But my challenge is the slow moving nature of the real estate market, where a development might be on a 10-year cycle, and yet a single fund in venture is a 10-year return, and they're expecting a 10x return on that. So I struggle with the fact that there's a misalignment in terms of timing and expectation of return.
Okay. I mean, no, I do think there can be a bit of that. So certainly the one thing I worry about is, where does the funding come for innovation? So the second thing is there can be a conflict of interest in that time thing that goes on, and also in what venture funds can encourage startups to do, which I think, if you're a customer, doesn't always feel very comfortable.
Just expand on that bit for me, sorry.
Yeah, because
just to understand that fully.
Because of the timescales that you talk about, the type of return that they want, I'm not always clear that is in the customer's best interest. Because
and the customer being
the British Lands or whoever.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha.
It might be because you see companies who they are quite early in their stage of developing a product. Right. They're under huge pressure to make sales, and you get a product which really should have had a bit more development. Number one, because they're under huge pressure to go out and sell the product, which is people used to call it vaporware. somebody to call it vague, but there's not much that sits behind it, and they expect you to effectively give money for development, because that's what you do. When things don't go to plan, everybody comes cap in hand and says, can we have a bit more money? And the other thing is that often they're moving on to the next thing before they've got that particular piece of technology fully developed, and they might be going making acquisitions in adjacent or different areas. You go like, no, keep on this one. You haven't yet nailed this particular technology. Why are you going off making more acquisitions? Because the view is, of course, is if you make scale, then when you sell, the business is worth more. So I would agree with you that I think that there is something about the industry which can make it difficult to be on the receiving end as a customer.
Can I pick up on that what you talked about, customers' best interests? What do you see customers wanting now? What do they want now? And your kind of vision for the future, what do you see them wanting in the future?
Yeah, well, it's a very broad customers, because customers want lots of different things. But if you are deploying a technology, you want it to work. You can't be their guinea pig. Because imagine if you say, okay, I'm going to spend money deploying something or other, and then it doesn't work. And you go, oh, we just found out that, and then a year later, you're still messing around with things. And, or the company goes bust. So those things do go on, where you take on a business and it's not everything that it seems. I mean, British Land was really cautious. That's what I mean, fail fast, was really cautious. And when things don't go well and you have to put your hand up and say, I just have to write that off.
That's really, do you know what? That's a really interesting insight, Sally.
Yeah.
Because I want to put it to you that depends on what your expectations of the trial is or are. Because from a British Land perspective, it sounds as if they didn't want it to fail and it had to add value at some extent to British Land. So there was a value attached to trying innovative solutions. Whereas in some businesses, they might try to bring in innovation, like they might have an incubator process, or they might try and help startups to do exactly what it is, which is to test and learn. And actually the outcome is not about value add, it's about creating a culture of innovation where a realization it's okay, not that it's okay to fail fast, but it's okay to fail, because you then learn. So there's at British Land, was it about adding value, or was it?
Yeah. I know Grosvenor has got an innovation sort of test kitchen and other things. It takes a different view, but British Land didn't take that view. So we tried a few pilots on things like access control and on at York House, and on also building control. But I think that the appetite of the business for that's quite low. The appetite for people to participate in pilots which don't go anywhere is quite low, because there's not hordes of people. You've got to persuade someone to help you out when they've got their day job.
Yeah.
So the concept of piloting and then it going nowhere feels quite dangerous to me. We did a bit of access control is interesting, because I'm now working for Swift Connect. So we started access control in 2015, right? And only just now is there a product in Swift Connect which works.
Do you know, I think you're raising a really interesting point in terms of piloting specifically in the real estate sector, specifically in commercial real estate. So from a psychological perspective, people get very stressed at work. And what we find is it's something not working, some small thing that adds that extra frustration to their day that tips them over the edge. And I think what you're picking up on is quite a subtle but very important difference between innovation in your industry and innovation in, say, you're innovating a new phone or a new process. It has the potential actually to make people's working day very, very difficult
Yeah.
and to tip them over the edge in terms of stress. And I think that's a really important point to
Yeah.
consider. More of a.
Have you spoken to Craig at Grosvenor? I mean, Craig
No, we're speaking to, well, actually I have, and we're trying to line it up. So we've got the head of sustainability at Grosvenor joining us for a chat.
Yeah.
Because like you said, sustainability is a big driver of the change. And I've invited Craig to come along, and I don't know if the dates.
They've got an innovation hub where I think they do that, but it's it is because they've decided to take that specific decision and spend time and energy, which is fantastic. But you think about Grosvenor, they're not a public business. They've got a really long term, they've been around for 300 and something years already. So it'd be interesting when you have a discussion with them. I have a bit with Craig, does that drive a different mindset, because they can take this kind of longer term view. I'd be interested to know which other real estate companies are able to do much more of this kind of piloting, just to see if it works.
I think that comes down to the vision and the mission of, in your case, someone like Chris, where, really it was about an underlying demand of adding value. And that was probably the risk profiling, which is it needed to work.
Yeah.
And then you've got others who are instigating sort of innovation in a different way, which is, we want to create a cultural shift as well as trying different technologies. I think there's a really, really different mindset. And if I may, what I find really fascinating about the British Land approach, where it has to add value, and I'm bringing this back to venture so that it's not all British Land, but when you've got companies like a British Land where, it's got to add the value, I find it fascinating they're then going to invest considerable money into funds where, especially early stage funds, where, you're looking at 70% of those businesses are going to fail.
Yeah. I
mean, there's almost an ironic and a contradiction in terms about strategy there.
British Land, I mean, I would hesitate to say that this is this was all part of a super, super coherent strategy. It was part of a strategy, but British Land put money into Fifth Wall, which is not an early stage fund.
It's not, no, correct.
And that was because we thought they were super smart and would help us connect with the ecosystem and lots of people as well. So we got to know the really big companies in the US. So we spent a lot of time talking to, Brookfield and Oxford Properties and all these other people about what they were doing, which was so valuable. So being part of that ecosystem, we learned a hell of a lot. But did we choose to go early stage, late stage? No, we didn't. We happened to partner with a later stage business. So a lot of their companies were much more mature than the companies we ended up working with, like Equiem, for example, who was, they were far too early stage for Fifth Wall. So I do applaud people who invest in early stage VCs as a way of, I think, just putting money into the industry, because I think that's really important.
Really interesting. Amy, have you got anything else that you want to go? Because I'm just conscious I've hogged quite a lot of the sort of the more challenging aspects of this. And I think
it's been absolutely fascinating conversation. It's been great. I guess just one final question. What are you excited about next? What's next for you?
Well, it's still quite early stage, actually. So just working with these two particular companies I'm working with. It's really, I'm spending quite a lot of time on Swift Connect at the moment, and it's just really exciting. It's rolled out it's deployed in British Land, and I think it's just really exciting seeing that vision of what we were looking for all that time ago come to fruition. And I see, the possibility of how that business can grow in Europe. It's already established in the US. So it's just really exciting working with a business where you think the product's fantastic and where there seems to be a huge amount of customer pull. And sorry, just to get the point is, I think that I do think it's a bit lazy sometimes just piloting for piloting's sake. Because I think if you're really clear what your customers want, you can be a bit more specific. And that's what we did at British Land. We decided we are going to go after these things and not everything. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm excited for this new opportunity which has come my way, which I'll be starting next year. So it's still early days for me post British Land, actually.
It sounds great.
So can I just ask 2 points about leadership very quickly?
Yes.
Given all the leadership that you had and you carried out at British Land, and everything that you've now seen on the technology side, obviously with Swift and with Equiem and so forth, how do the leadership styles differ? And is it true there is a disconnect between the attitudes and languages that both sides of that market use?
I do think probably both sides don't understand each other.
Okay.
Which is when you sit in real estate, it's often really annoying having all these tech companies coming in and telling you what they want to do, because you have no idea what it's like trying to get this implemented, and that you can't come in with vaporware and all these things. So I think you can sometimes be less sympathetic than you should be to young businesses which are trying to make it, but you're really busy. So I think there could be more understanding on either sides of how actually it works.
Yeah.
And therefore what it means to work with people, in industries in business which are quite different. And then I think there would be less frustration on both sides. And I think that in tech, I think at Equiem and Swift Connect, they've got more mature management in the nicest possible way. Equiem's been around a long time. It's got a very experienced board, and it's got much more established systems. And Swift Connect's got some people who've done it before. But often these businesses you work with, the people are really young. So they are having to innovate, do tech, manage people, hire people, sell their business. Oh man, I'm often absolutely not overawed, but I'm incredibly impressed with some of the people I meet. And I'm going, you're so young, you're in your 20s, and you're doing all of this stuff. And you're running successful businesses, and you're raising money, and, and I think if people stood back and thought of all the things these guys and girls are doing, you've got to be really impressed. Not with all of them, but with, quite a large cadre of them. You go like, you're pretty impressive.
Yeah, they are generally, their mindsets are incredible. And then finally on that last little bit of everything that you've now learned.
Sorry, we should get some of them on this.
There are some very, very, you think that's a wise head on young shoulders.
Well, and the experience they then come out of it as well. And what I found fascinating, and I'm definitely not one of those super clever, brilliant minds, but having gone through the experience, you don't know the experience you're picking up until you're out of it.
Exactly.
And then you can reflect back and go, actually, Christ, I've come a long way in that time. So it is a really valuable process that any entrepreneurial brain should go through in terms of setting up the business and hiring, firing and scaling and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
But they'll never realize it until they're out. But that takes me in mind to the last question I have. And I'm sorry, Sally, it's gone on for so long, but there's some really interesting angles here. The experience you've gleaned on the technology side over the last year, and obviously previously when you were with British Land beforehand, do you, knowing what you know now, would you have approached everything at British Land differently? And perhaps, the role that you're taking up in the new year, going back into the traditional side, will you now address things differently because of the knowledge you've gained?
Well, I think we've covered some of it. In no particular order. I'd be much more sympathetic to the tech companies that I that I come across, in terms of helping them develop. Even if I could, I'd provide them a bit more funding, actually. That's a very difficult one because it takes up so much time, but I probably would do it through a VC rather than off my own back, because that's too hard. I think that I would spend an enormous amount of time on stakeholder management.
Okay, interesting. No one said that to me before. Why? What? Just because of the communication and making sure they were sort of on board?
Yeah, you absolutely have to. You absolutely have to make sure you've got all the stakeholders on board, because it's such a complicated food chain.
Right.
Because you've got to have asset managers, leasing managers, development people, property managers, facility managers. You've got to have so many people who will buy into the concept of what you're doing. So just Facilio is a building management platform which has been very successfully deployed at British Land. And it's all very well have the techie people manage to start with, but eventually you have to hand it over. It's going to have to be managed by the property management people. Okay. So you have to have a system that they want, they understand, designed for them. And unless you involve them all the way through, you'll have designed something beautiful which will get put in the bottom drawer.
Well, one of the things I'm doing for JLL at the moment actually is me and a fellow psychologist, James Weavers, we're running a big collaboration program. Yeah. So with that exactly in mind, that from the very outset of these new projects, you get everybody together on board by running lots of, different programs from the perspective of psychology to create those sorts of collaborative mindsets. Just interesting that you picked up on that, because it's not something that we'd heard before in these interviews.
But you've got to do it in the right way. Got to do it in the right way. You've got to do it in the right way. And it was only when we started to do that at British Land that we started to really get traction. We always believed in the product. We always believed in Facilio and Equium and Swift Connect and these things. We knew that there was a technology we wanted to deploy. But it was sort of when we really started to enroll everybody in the decision making and the design that it made such a difference. And I think the last thing I would say is that you've really got to create the vision as well. I think so that people can really, when you get bumps in the road, people have still got holding on to the vision of what you're trying to create. Says it really, really clearly. And James Dearsley from James Pellet from GPE said that to me. So that's when he really started to, make progress, when he created a vision and strategy, because he could always hold on to that. So
it's the Northern Star, isn't it? Yeah, and it's great when everything's going well, but when things aren't going well, as they often aren't in these big innovative projects, having that Northern Star keeps people on track. I remember a wonderful quote that I noticed that I saw when I took my kids to the Kennedy Space Center, written by one of the early space shuttle engineers, who says a wonderful quote, something about, we've traveled on stormy seas, lost sight of the land a few times, but we've always had a guiding star to get us to where we need to go. And I just thought, God, if there's one example of human endeavor and what you can achieve if you have a very clear vision, I mean, that's it, isn't it?
Well, I guess that must be the big takeaway, mustn't it? If you remember, people do very bold things when people know what they're following.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a very apt end to the live stream bit. Anyway, so Sally, just publicly, thanks ever so much. I'm just going to end the stream there. It really is a